Falcha. You're listening to SewBro, where we talk and sew. How do I say your last?
Scott Froschauer. So you think like you got a big head of hair, like an afro, and then you shave it, and it comes raining down, so it's a fro shower.
Hilarious. I'm joined today by my guest, artist Scott Froschauer. So, Scott is the first visual artist we've had on this podcast, so we want to welcome him. So, Scott, how long have you been making art for?
Since I was a little kid. Right, I started out, when I was a little kid, making stuff. I remember I'm an only child, and so trying to make friends in the neighborhood. I remember when I was a little kid, I made a bunch of art and I put it up on our back porch, and then I went out to the sidewalk and I set up a thing that said art show, and that's how I tried to make friends. I don't think anybody came, but that in my mind, I was that's how I'm gonna meet people. Is I'm gonna make art and I'm gonna try and get people to come to my art show.
At least you were a kid and you got that experience out of the way early.
Totally.
I know a lot of artists who have their first show at 19 or 25 and no one shows up and it breaks them.
Yeah, exactly. No, that was deep in my psyche. So I was well prepared for apathy. Yeah, at a young age.
So where did you grow up, just so we can get a...
So I was born in Chicago. So that happened in Chicago, in the south suburbs of Chicago. And then my folks moved to Connecticut when I was 15. And then I kind of did my formative years of high school and stuff in Connecticut. In this really white, rich, it was I don't, I had nothing to compare it to, but it's looking back, it's holy cow, there's just a lot of energy that comes from that. It was a very wealthy, suburb of New York City. And then I went to school, and came to LA to work in the film business.
Wow, great.
Because I love making movies, and I was I'm gonna go make movies in LA. And I dropped out of art school. I went to art school for a semester, and I was I can't draw very well. And I'd be sitting next to, I specifically remember I would be sitting next to this woman who was, I would be just torturing myself trying to draw stuff, and I could do it. I think I was passable, but it was just torture to try and, I was so hyper precise. And she would come in and with 3 strokes, she would just and give you the essence of what you're looking at. And I'm I do not know how to do that. She was just so free and easy, and just would just make these strokes, and those strokes would encapsulate somebody's expression, just oh, she's got the nose and then the eye, and I'm I using it as an art form, I just couldn't. And I was okay, I'm not an artist, I'm just not. And so I thought drawing and painting was art. And so so I dropped out of art school and ended up getting my degree in linguistics.
Wow, you're screw these images, I'm gonna go to the words.
I get the words. Actually, it was because English was my worst subject, and so I decided I was gonna get my degree in English because it was my worst. I a lot of times I go for what I see as my weaknesses, and so I've always been very good in math and science. So I studied a lot of engineering, so that's my strength. Mm-hmm. And I didn't do as well at English, and I'm that's what I'm gonna do then. I'm gonna get my degree in English. And I studied English theory, so postmodern theory and
cool.
Yeah, Freudian theory and stuff like that.
I was in honors English all of high school.
Oh yeah.
And to the point where I wouldn't follow the rules on poetry assignments. I just knew I had to write that good of a poem.
Yeah.
And, I could give the teacher a tearjerker and they would forget that I completely ignored the rhyme scheme.
Totally.
And also I was butting heads with them because I was doing slam poetry in high school. I'm you're teaching poetry the wrong way. You're supposed to teach free verse before iambic pentameter.
Oh my god.
And just that, and they would let me leave class if it was just reading time because they knew I'd have a slam to prepare for.
Right.
But
that's awesome.
Just being on that level of nerd where I'm
yeah.
Get arguing with the teacher over the curriculum.
Yeah.
But the downside of that was math. I was I had to do on independent study because I was so behind. I didn't understand teachers gave up on me, and I'm just like, I just can't do.
And am I ever going to use this stuff?
Well,
you know, like parts of it are also just like, you know, is this really useful to my future? You know.
Well, I tried being a STEM major, so a lot of it was. I was just like you were. I was trying to do the thing that was bad. That I was bad at.
Oh, like me, right?
Yeah. But.
Yeah.
But I also, to bring this back to your art, of like, I also like it, that helps me understand the graphic nature and the iconography you use.
Totally.
Because when you're talking about like hand stuff, like my eye tattoo and my tree tattoos are direct traces of my hand drawings.
Right.
Whereas this is my water tattoo was more done in like a graphic design app.
Right. Yeah.
So understanding, like, I understand how you feeling limited by the work of your own hand, but understanding shape, symmetry, and alignment.
Totally. So, you know, geometrics and things like that are, you know, I've always been much more comfortable in like that kind of precision, and it's really been an exploration in kind of letting go of that and allowing for like more of an emotional, you know, intuitive sort of, you know, kind of movement in my work is something that I'm not gonna say I struggled with, something that's always been interesting to me. I've always wanted more of that in my work, because my work, you know, so much of it is based on like precision and you know, replication and, you know, hard lines and things like that. And the language is much more mushy, right? Like my work is like one word on a sign, right? So it's like, you know, it's like the most whittled down poem you can make, right? I get like 1, 2, maybe 3 words, and it's like, okay, how am I going to what message am I conveying in those 3 words? You know, what is someone else going to actually interpret? Like, you can't control what somebody else gets out of it. So you put a word on a sign, like relax, right? I had one that said relax. There was this woman that freaked out on the Nextdoor app, and she's like, there's this sign in this park in Glendale, and it says relax, and it's, you know, she felt like attacked by it, right? It's like, right, that could happen. It says relax. But she's feeling like I'm like imposing, the sign's imposing on her.
It's like, do you know how many, like, walk down any street in LA, try to find me a pole that doesn't have a bad word paint penned on it.
Totally.
And it's just like, if that was your main vendetta, you could walk around with a paint can and feel like you're saving the day. But
all the time.
No, and it's like, when you especially can see like it's artistic and thought and like a joke on our use of symbols. It's
funny. Well, it just opens up that you can't reach everyone, right? People are going to bring their preconceptions no matter what you do. And, you know, I always think of, you know, my attempt isn't to try and hit 100% of the people who walk by my work. My attempt is to hit like 2% of the people that walk by my work. Most of them are going to just ignore it, right? They're not even going to look at it. And then the ones that do, a lot of them are just going to glaze past it, right? So it's like, you know, I know that it's not going to connect with everybody. It goes back to what we were saying about like having the art show that nobody shows up to, right? I know that, you know, my goal is not to connect with everybody. My goal is to do me really well, and who it connects with, that's the audience it's supposed to have.
I like what you said, and you're not trying to make everyone happy, and you understand it's not going to connect with everyone. And one of like my favorite like quotes about just performing and people's attention is Doug Stanhope saying, doing stand-up's a lot like going into battle. And he goes to the audience, you're not all going to be here by the end of this.
Right, totally.
And I almost would like, as a performer, I almost like having a third of the crowd love me.
Right.
Rather than have all of the crowd accept
kind
me.
Of, yeah.
Because then it's like, okay, I'm really resonating with you and appreciating that, and just accepting the fact that people are gonna walk by. I've seen performers lose it when people walk out in the middle of their sets, and it's a part of just the like, no, you're making yourself vulnerable sharing this, and especially with like symbols and art, it's silent. Whereas when I have a microphone, I can call people and be like, no, look at me. Why?
Totally.
And start poking at them like, why are...
Yeah, what are you doing? Yeah.
And...
Yeah.
I also think that's why, like, art is so great for some people, because they get to face that rejection and come to terms with it or not, because... But...
Allow it to be out there.
Yeah.
Allow it to do its work, whatever it's going to do.
And also with, like, the color schemes, because I was thinking how universal, like, symbols are, especially, like, signage, where you can go to other countries and get a gist of what you shouldn't be doing where, even if you don't understand the words.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like about your art, is when you see, like, the signage colors, you just think, oh, it's another sign, but then you walk in and it's almost like a hallucination, like, no, did it really just say that? Am I interjecting things?
Yes.
And I like that mind game it plays, where you're doing a double take, where you're like, did that sign just tell me to relax? And
Right. Or there's this concept of, like, the blind spot in your eye that your brain fills in the things that you don't see. And so if I give you a sign that's a red octagon that says start, and you only read the first two letters of it, it's really easy for your brain to just fill in stop. Because that's what, from, your youngest moments, that's what you've been trained to do. So your brain will just fill stuff in. And to me, there's that, this opportunity that happens with a surprise, that it doesn't say the thing you're expecting. And to me, I think a lot about that marketing works that way, right? That marketing tries to jar you to get your attention, but then marketing tries to, once it jars you and gets the door open a little bit, it tries to follow it up with, like, trying to sell you a product, right? That's the whole point of marketing. Is like it wants to surprise you and tweak you or whatever, and then you go, oh, look at that thing over there, and it's like, now that I've got your attention, buy this beer, right? Like, that's the whole concept of marketing. And instead, I'm using that same technique of getting your attention and opening that door, but now I'm following it up with breathe. I'm following it up with be present. I'm following it up with something that's, like, supportive of you, rather than something that's going to eventually be alienating you, which is some product that tells you that you don't have fun enough friends, so you should drink a different beer. Oh, your friends aren't fun, but you'll have fun friends if you drink this beer. You smell, you should use this deodorant. There's all this stuff wrong with you, but this product will fix it for you.
I did graphic design in high school, and my teacher was, like, training us if we wanted to be, like, working photographers. So we had to study, like, ad psychology. Have you seen the documentary Helvetica?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Like, I can't make a post on social media now without thinking about the font theory.
Yeah, of course.
And those are all, like, little things where it's like, normal person isn't thinking twice about them. Some of the top psychology research in the world is dedicated to getting you to look at something, to not click away for 10 seconds longer. And that, it makes me, like, really paranoid now, especially when I'm like, that could be useful. Wait a minute, they figured me out.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I kind of like that. Uh-oh, be careful about kind of liking something that's probably been programmed so that you'll like it.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the things I appreciate about your art, is it's, like, masquerading as everyday advertisements and signage.
Yeah.
And it gave me a very much of, like, They Live feel. Like, you're gonna...
Oh, totally. Yeah, the sunglasses, like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I also, like, think that's the power of images, is a song and a performance lasts minutes. They'll show an hour or two of... But a sign, it's like, that can stay up there for a long time, long after. And especially when you're, like, thinking about graffiti and carvings, that's what I'm like, oh, this is going to outlive the generation that it came from.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, because we were talking about, like, how the signage is all universal now, because we're in a globalized system. Whereas, like, how many times of that life or death of someone walking into a new place, seeing a sign going, I don't know what that means.
Poison. I don't know that means poison.
Yeah.
I'll just eat these berries. Yeah, I think of it in terms of counterfeiting. I'm trying to take almost exactly what currently exists out there in the world, and I'm trying to counterfeit it so precisely that that I'm kind of hooking into those ideas that are already in somebody's head. So those signs are actual Department of Transportation spec. So they're the actual materials. I actually use the actual vendor that the city uses, and I use their software. So I just go into their software and I submit as if I'm like the city of Glendale. I just submit into that software and I just inject into their workflow, and they produce signs for me as if I were like Newport Beach or something like that. So I'm in line with like La Cañada. And sometimes it takes a long time for me to get my stuff because I'll get in line behind some city who's redoing all of their, I don't know, whatever, no left turn signs. And so there's thousands of them being produced, and so the whole system is bogged down by that. And so I have to wait until those go before mine go into the process. But it's, how can I counterfeit as precisely as possible? And I'm doing the same font, the same color, the same material, the same metal, the same installation technique, everything. I'm just changing the last 3 letters of one word. So everything else is precisely the same, except for instead of stop, it's start. I'm just changing a couple letters. That's the goal. That's the theory.
I like how methodical you are, and that it's a part of like, no, you're going through the actual channels to make it great. And as someone who goes out of their way to make their stuff a little too lifelike sometimes, and then has really heavy Ren Fair shields to carry, I admire that you're like going through the proper
authentic.
Rather than just like cutting it on a wood on a bandsaw
and then painting it or something.
Like I remember like saying like, no, all those colors you think are just yellow, there's like a 12-digit thing code specifying what that shade is.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've gotten that with like in working with clothes where it's like, is that white, off-white, or eggshell?
Right.
And then you're just like, is
it going to show up on camera? Really?
Yeah.
Really? Is it going to show up on camera?
Yeah, or just like, what? Green? No, the other kind of green. The lighter green. The other light green.
Yeah, the other light green. Yeah. My wife is a makeup artist, and she studied a lot of color theory, and so she has, like you talking about that, she has this relationship with color that like I just don't have. Like she can look at something, she can look at 2 colors and she can say, oh, that one's a hair more magenta and da 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 da, and like she can call out the exact difference between the 2 colors, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know, that one just looks a little different to me. I don't know what's going on there, but that's something that I think you just really have to train for. Like I don't have that skill set of like you're saying, that like precision of color. It's like, it's a whole universe.
Yeah, and especially when you throw in like lighting into the mix.
Totally. Which is what I do. That's my...
Because there's sometimes where I'm like trying to like, I have like fashion OCD where like, if you see me wearing clashing colors, no, I wasn't planning on leaving the house, or I was very depressed. Because there's times where you're like lounging around sad. I'm like, I look fantastic. Just
right.
And even my friend's daughter, I was once at an open mic, she's like, why do you do this? And I was like in purple jeans. I'm like, this. I'm like, I like, and like I had purple socks that matched.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is just how I express. I'm not a guitar prodigy like you are, young one.
Right.
And I've had that with like outfits where I was like, oh, this guy looks orange. It's like, no, you want it to look orange because you want it to look Naruto. It's brown. Right. I had that with my coworkers who were like, are these orange? I'm like, no, it's brown. They looked at me like I was insane. I'm like, this is my brain wanting it to be orange. These pants to be orange are way too bad.
Right. That's hilarious.
And then with like just other stuff like lining up colors, like what colors complement each other versus what colors don't.
Yeah.
Because I've been out at times and looked at dudes and I'm like, you don't have friends. Cause
somebody should have told you.
Yes. No.
They let you out like that, huh?
Yeah, or I have another friend who has a joke about men who fix other men's collars. I'm like, I fix my friends' collars all the time. He's like, I stand by my statement.
Right.
I'm like...
Right, yeah, exactly.
What?
That's awesome.
Real friends fix each other's collars.
Right. Don't let friends clash like that.
Yeah, and... But I also think that's just like any other artist has their senses sharpened for a specific thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you're hanging out with musicians, you can tell the difference between chords, and you're just like...
Yeah, no idea. Yeah, the one that always gets me, so I do lighting for film and television. That's like been my career for, I don't know, the past 30 years now. And we'll put diffusions in front of lights. So you have a light, and then you'll put like a piece of cloth in front of it to make the light softer. And there are like 20 different gradations of that cloth that goes in front of it. And it's like when you first start out, you're just like, you have to read the numbers on them so that you know which is which. But like after you've done it for like 10 years, you can just pick one up and you don't have to know what the number is. You can look at it and just feel it. You're like, oh, I know what this is, you know. And it's like, it's very delicately different than this piece of white cloth. They're like, to most people, they're like, no, those are just two pieces of white cloth. It's like, oh no, this one's this grade, this one's this grade. Like, you just feel it enough and you just get used to it. You're like, I know the difference between those two things.
Yeah, I've gotten to that point with fabric where I can like, I ask her like, can I give your clothes a, like, especially I'm like hanging out and we're like talking about the piece. Like, because I can tell more, I can read a fabric better with my fingertips,
right, to touch it,
than with my eyes, because I can.
Yeah.
And that's also just from like handling thousands of clothes and checking the labels and then like knowing how stuff is treated.
Yeah.
Because also like I have like very sensitive skin, so I've gotten plenty of nice pieces of clothing where I'm like, I can't, and it's just because I
know I can't. Yeah.
But that's also like the stuff I make myself is super soft.
Right. Yeah.
And that's
awesome.
why I don't sell. It's like no. This is.
Yeah. That reminds me, I was listening to a podcast that they were talking about wine tasting, and this one guy was like, I don't necessarily believe all of these people who talk about wine tasting. Like, I know nothing about wine tasting, but they were talking about it on this podcast. And this guy said, yeah, but I think that it's like, if you were trapped on a desert island and you had a box full of photographs of David Hasselhoff eating a sandwich, like 50 photographs of David Hasselhoff eating a sandwich, and you were trapped on this desert island for like a year, you would organize them by like, oh, I like this one best because you can see a little bit of mayonnaise on his cheek. And you would organize all of these photographs by some sort of theory that you would organize them by. And you would get super into like, oh, you can't see any lettuce in this one, but you can see some mayo in this one. And like the box of David Hasselhoff pictures becomes any like system of like organization that if you're deep enough into it, you get like to be this expert on that thing, and it's just completely arbitrary. Just like, I'm this expert on David Hasselhoff eating a sandwich. Like, same as like wine tasting. Like, no, you see, this one's got these tones of this and this. But I feel like that, you know, it can go anything if you spend enough time delving into it.
As a neurodivergent insomniac with a little too much free time to look up useless facts and watch documentaries, I've caught myself at times where I was like watching a crash course thing on the Mongols, and they're like Genghis Khan. I'm like, actually, it was Chinggis, and I just stopped. No one learn how to talk to people. This is never going to be
right.
It's like, actually, it was Gaius Julius Caesar. Just no one cares.
No one cares. Right. I have all of this detail. So much detail.
Yeah, and I've been at like parties or someone's like, did that really happen? And then my friends go, don't.
Don't. We're gonna go down a rabbit hole.
Just if it happened, you don't ask how he knows it. Don't ask him
to prove it. Exactly. Let's just accept that.
Yeah, and just like, this isn't your run-of-the-mill party conversation.
Yeah, exactly. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. That's awesome.
Yeah, but I also like, that's the fun of like art, is how are you intertwining that with, because with what you're doing, because that's what always intrigues me the most is like the artists who have those multifaceted, like Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine has a degree in social studies from Harvard, and it's just like, oh, that adds a different.
Yeah.
You're not really debating his lyrics anymore because you're just scared of the thesis that you'll be responded with.
Right. That's all there. Well, so my degree's in theoretical linguistics. So it's this idea, of systems of signification, and that could be language is a system of signification, but like, clothing is a system of signification. There's all of these different systems that we interpret, that we're constantly broadcasting and interpreting, and people are digesting, and that's what my degree is in. That's what I studied. And so to then end up doing actual like signs, like as my like art form, it's like, yeah, well, there's systems of signification, and how am I hijacking these very broadly used cultural systems, stop signs, like to me, like the broadest, most common system of communication that we have in our entire culture, and hijacking that and being like, okay, well, what's the pre-existing concepts people have, and how am I hooking into those pre-existing concepts? But that's it exactly. My degree ended up completely informing, what my artwork is. I didn't know it at the time. I'm studying, Freudian theory of the subconscious, thinking this is, I'm enjoying this, but it's never going to be useful in my life. Like, I'm never going to do anything with it. It's like, oh no, that's actually what my career is now.
My first English class of college, it was a very like general requirement. The teacher goes around asking everyone their majors, and there was one woman in the class who was an English major, and he goes, "Do you know what you can do with an English major?" And she goes, "No, what?" She's like, "Teach English."
That's right, that's it.
And totally. I was just, and he was like laughing, like, "Oh, you've chosen the same path as me, child."
Exactly, that's all you can do with this.
Yeah, but I also like, I feel like when people say like, "Oh, I got some bogus degree," it's like, no, you're not using it, because even though I was like studying climate science, I applied a lot of that to my work with like writing, with jokes, with poetry, of incorporating the more fundamental stuff that like, okay, this is a way of teaching people something, or I can use this rhyme scheme to engage about pollution, or how I made sense of this. And a lot of like learning how to cope with the sad information I was learning kind of got me into comedy, because I was like, all right. I'm gonna go to this comedy mic after 3 of the most depressing lectures of my life.
Right. I'm so traumatized. Let's go do something.
Yes, jokes at a bar sound great
exactly.
after
anything. Yeah.
And then trying to like come up with jokes with those emotions.
Right.
And like with visual art, it's not the thing I consider myself best at, but it's one of my favorite things to do. Like, whenever I'm like at a loss for words, and this is where I've had friends be like, "Oh, why don't you just write about it?" It's like, no, this visual piece is helping me get stuff off my chest, because sometimes it's easier to put stuff in the abstract. Like you were saying, "Oh, I'm only using one word." It's like for me, that's the true mark of a good writer, is saying the most you can with as few words as possible.
Yeah.
And when I was like really competing in poetry slams, you have a 3-minute time limit.
Right.
So my mentors, one of my favorite things they do is they would black out lines that I could make shorter.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that line you thought was good, I want you to say the same amount of thing, but with the fewer words.
Yeah.
And that's some of the most historic responses are ancient Greek and Spartans responding with things like "if" or just a single sentence.
Yeah.
And I would argue that stop signs are more effective than the word stop historically.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Because a stop sign means you're going to crash into something. Someone saying the word stop is just
Yeah, exactly.
It's a suggestion.
Right. Well, and it's also that it's, to me, it's also because it's so culturally ingrained. Like, you get to a point as a driver where it's reflexive, right? So reflexive means that it doesn't actually have to go through your brain for something to happen. So like when you put your hand over a fire, the muscles in your arm will actually pull your hand out without your brain having to actually think, pull your hand out, right? So your nervous system's capable of making choices without your brain actually getting in the loop for some certain things. That's what reflex is, right? When they hit your knee and your foot does this, that's a reflex. It doesn't go through your brain. Your central nervous system can make choices without your brain having to go. So a stop sign, the red octagon, you can be driving And you could be talking to somebody in the car, and your foot just automatically just goes to the brake pedal without you consciously thinking about it. That's reflex. And that's, to me, that's the really fun thing to tap into is, okay, there's something going on where your body is actually responding to a red octagon without your brain actually even participating in it. It's like, that's where I want to be working. I want to be working in, this like, bypassing the conscious mind, going at the subconscious and being like, okay, what can we do with that?
I like where you're going with this, with subconscious symbolism. A lot of like my research just for fun has been like ancient symbols, like how far back can you trace a culture with symbols, because a lot of times it's like a triskelion or a certain pattern are all your indicators of who was where.
Yeah, consistency, right? There's a lineage.
Because it's like a pattern of some sort that you can associate with a group.
We found it here, we found it here, we found it here. They obviously...
And that's where, like, I love studying ancient history, because it's always like, we found something a little deeper in a completely different part of the world. We have to get back to the timeline and fix it.
Yeah, exactly. They obviously took a detour over here or something.
Yeah, and, like, I was watching this thing, like, they were showing Rorschach tests to primates, humans being one of the groups, and they found as the symbols became more snake or spider-like, heart rate increased.
Right.
Fear, they're more jumpy.
Yeah.
And reactive to stimuli. And it was like snakes were the most ingrained one, and then spiders were like a number 2.
Yeah.
But just what does that say about us as a species, that across groups, and just even when they aren't exposed to like having been bit by a snake, there's fear.
Something that's still there.
Yeah, and that whole thing of like primates and snakes were in an arms race of, we were trying to figure out longer and sharper sticks, and they were becoming more venomous.
Yeah, exactly. And stronger necks or whatever.
Yeah, same with like spiders, but just that, and that's like, I'm comfortable with a lot of animals. I don't like spiders, snakes, I'm just scaly and... But getting that whole thing of like, how old can a symbol be associated? And when you are going to like
deep
monkey and primates, and then they're jumpy. But to be fair, they're also encountering snakes so much more often than say we are.
Yeah. Well, I was sitting on my porch with my wife one night, and there was an owl in a tree across the street, and it was a huge freaking owl, like 6-foot wingspan. It was this gigantic freaking owl, and we were sitting there, and the owl locked in on us, and I don't know if he was trying to scare us or what, but he swooped down and like kind of came down and kind of flew over us just silently. They're really quiet when they fly.
Yeah.
And so it just did this thing, and there was this moment where like there's like an ancestor, like some little mammal, like a mouse or something that's an ancestor of mine that has a part of my brain that was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. Right? Like this owl came at us, and like he didn't even, it's not like he got like so close that like I was really actually afraid, but there was this thing you're talking about. There was something in my deep-seated subconscious, like my animalistic past, that's like a mouse that was like, that thing's gonna kill me. And like I was like frozen. I was like, oh my God. And I was like, oh, I just experienced some sort of like regression. Like I just went back like millions of years to like some ancestor that was like a muskrat or something.
I've said to a few friends, like, hey, the last time we hung out, we had tails.
Yeah, totally.
I haven't like had that fear with like an animal I encountered, because normally when I see like hawks and owls, I'm like, cool. But to be fair, it's like owls are night stealth assassins that are silent so they can rip hawks out of.
Exactly.
That's one of those animals where it's like, man, if this were some like Ice Age situation where they're like 3 times bigger. Because I've seen like neighborhoods where it's like, oh, owls will go after small dogs.
Oh, this one killed a 35-pound bulldog. This owl killed a 35-pound bulldog about a block away from my house. Like it's kind of like Neolithic, there's a little bit of Ice Age going on there. Like, oh yeah, no, there's still there's that play is still working itself out. Like we like keep thinking, oh no, we're modern.
We're outside.
We're outside of that. It's like no, we're in denial. Is what we are. We're still deep in that whole system. It's going on.
One night after a party in college, I felt like I was Mr. Nature, and there were a pack of coyotes in this San Francisco suburb. And I walked up, tried to pet them, and they ran away from me. Like, their primal instinct was like,
I don't want any part of this thing.
This one isn't scared of us. This is
exactly. He might be rabid. He might have some sort of rabies or something. He's coming to us. They're like, he's got a problem.
It's like I had shots, but I was still toxic.
Totally. We need to put him out of his misery because we don't know what's going to happen.
I also had a skateboard in my hand, so I was like, yeah, try me, Wiley.
Yeah, exactly.
But just...
Right.
One Easter, my family were out in the yard, and this bee, yellow jacket, just started chasing two of my siblings, and then they ran off, and then the dog, the spaniel, was like, I gotta protect the pack, started barking at it, and then the bee chased it, and it was like running prone, whimpering, and it was wild seeing this one bee
running the whole place.
Yeah, everyone went inside after that. It's like, it's his yard.
And he's demonstrated it, yeah.
Just like 6
humans.
Yes. All just like, and 2 dogs, and then they got us. One bee got everyone in the house, and it's just like...
Yeah, don't fuck with them. We know better.
But it's just like one little...
That's amazing, right?
That'd be the equivalent of like one human scaring 6 mechas away.
Yeah, exactly. Or like rhinoceroses or something. Like what?
Yeah, or like a mouse rearing elephants.
Exactly. Like that's awesome.
So, what are your thoughts of everything happening in America, the fascism specifically?
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you talked about how you found Palestine to be a really great educator, that it really opened your eyes to a lot of things, and I think that's a really resonant sort of idea, is how much what are our teachers, and where do we look to learn. And I think, as horrific as everything is, there's an education that's coming with it that, I know for myself, I was on a decolonial journey, but it wasn't as pronounced as, it has become. The last few years have really made it something that now, I think about all the time. I think about every day. It's part of my artwork. It's part of everything I'm doing. So I think, as horrible as things are, the other side of it is that it is an opportunity for growth and learning and understanding, and historical context. I think that's the biggest part of it, right? I mean, what you were considering was like the relevance of the Irish experience to the Palestinian experience. That's not something that's in my DNA, but what's in my DNA is I'm a frickin' American, and so what's in my DNA is the genocide and land theft that my existence is based on. And that's not something I had when I was younger. That's something that's become something that I understand as I've gotten older. And I think the conditions that we're existing in are something that really foreground that, and it brings out the opportunity to talk about it more. I mean, it's not the kind of thing I would necessarily have talked about, even if I had, and I studied quite a bit of Marx when I was in college. We studied Freud, we studied Marx, we studied, the postmodernists, and it's like, I can talk a lot about, like, Marxist theory, for instance, but like it's really different to think about experientially, you know, this kind of, you know, these kind of decolonial ideas and what is my relationship to colonization, you know, and things like that. That's all new. These are new ideas, you know, in the past, whatever, 6 years, 5 years, I don't know how long.
You bring up a lot of good points here that I want to unpack.
Yeah.
Like, specifically coming at it just from the privilege of middle class white dudes, and that like I'm well aware like how it's different for the people who don't have that cultural connection, because for me, like when I'm reading these accounts of like hunger, it's identical to the Irish famine.
Totally.
And just except they have like bombings and drones because it's horrific and cartoonish.
Yeah.
And I liked how you were saying how it's like, oh, just being able to see that it's wrong, because I've been interviewed at rallies where they're like, why are you out here? It's like, because I have a heart, a conscience. Regardless, my ancestors should not have had to go through the same stuff just for me to be sympathetic toward this. I'm out here just out of like, oh, how did you see what was happening on the screen and sleep? Like,
yeah.
And like what you're saying about it being an educational experience, because I feel like with the internet now, it's so much easier than like in the early to mid 2000s to get reliable independent sources.
Right.
Because I still like remember YouTube in like 2005 where it's like there wasn't documentary YouTube channels that were putting out stuff as well vetted or sometimes more than mainstream news.
Yeah.
Whereas like now that's kind of what I liked about it is you have all these independent groups who are throwing History Channel and news companies on their toes.
Yeah.
Because they realize like, no, we can tell the story. We can research too.
Yeah.
We also have a graphics team.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being able to like visualize it, and especially like the younger generation, we're on our screens and then we're seeing the stuff being filmed from people who are there.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to go through an NBC, CNN filter.
Yeah. Well, I think the Gulf War was such an, you know, and you know, because I was a grown up when the Gulf War was happening, and so that I was already I already saw through that, and I saw the manufacturing consent, you know, because I'd already, you know, studied a lot of this stuff in school, so I already knew about how consent's manufactured and those kinds of things and how to, you know, unpack all that kind of stuff. But at the time, I think the thing for me was that during the Gulf War, I blamed the Republicans. You know, I blamed Bush.
It was easy and fun, and
you know, I could still play the teams.
Yeah.
And be like, though they're the assholes, I just hate George Bush. I just hate Dick Cheney. I just hate Donald Rumsfeld. Like, they're the bad guys. And so I could still stick with that narrative of they're the bad guys. And then there was this whole Obama thing of like, oh, finally, you know, I can have some hope. I can have some relief from that, and things will get better. Finally, we have Obama, and Obama's going to make things better. And I think that's, you know, it's really, you know, interesting to then, you know, that I know my journey is not unique in that. To then come out the other side and be like, oh, it's not just one or the other, it's the whole freaking boat. The whole fucking boat is fucked up. It's all of them. You know, you got the fuck Biden thing going on. It's like, yeah, then, you know, it's like, no, it doesn't matter if you're, you know, which ballot you're putting in the box. They're all playing the same fucking game. And I think that's much harder to pull off. That understanding is much harder to come to when you have limited news sources.
Yeah.
Like, that's, to me, that's the game that's been so well played has been the, oh, you're on this team, you hate this team, or you're on this team and you hate this team. They've done a really good job of maintaining that for a really long time.
Yeah.
That's the part that's breaking down, is like, no, they're both the same team. There's got to be some
they're
other...
They're actually all friends.
They're all buddies. They all go to each other's weddings and shit.
Yeah.
Like it's 100%. And it's like, I think that's the revelation that having access to more news that isn't mediated by these monoliths of information. It's like, yeah, you can now say these things and like, oh, it makes sense, and you can say it to more people, and then somebody else says, oh yeah, no, I get that too, and you're like, oh yeah, oh good, we all get that, we're getting that.
I like that you brought up the Gulf War, because for me a part of this is just like, I've been watching brown kids in the Middle East,
totally,
Arabian Peninsula,
yeah,
like I've been watching kids across the region that we define as the Middle East get blown up and slaughtered since my earliest memories of seeing like my grandma watching the news. It's a question that like I've always wondered, and no one's ever given me a good answer, and because there's no answer to it. Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Why is their differences enough to have them slaughtered on a regional level?
Yeah.
And that's thing is like, it's not just new. It's just we do it in different places at different times, and then the whole media scheme of then when it all comes out and they can't deny that like
that was the bad war.
Yeah,
the last one was the bad war.
Yeah, and when NBC it's like, no, we learned from our lessons about how we covered the war in the Middle East, and then they're doing the same thing with how they're portraying Palestinians and Hamas, and it's just like, you missed the point of, you need to go back like 300 years and summarize it in 10 minutes, which is really easy to do. There's plenty of YouTube channels there.
Totally to do that.
But you need to like give people context of like, this isn't a year-old.
Yes.
Like, and even going back 300 years is kind of cutting.
Kind of iffy. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's why I love like history lectures where they're like, to understand this one time period, we're going to go back 1,000 years and cover those 1,000 years for an hour.
We'll sum this up. We'll do a quick overview to get us up to this point, then we can start talking about it. But to start talking about this, we gotta go back here.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I really have like tried to push myself on as an artist and as someone who's like gonna speak about these, because getting back to like how we're educated on this, like I remember the Israel and Palestine stuff when I was in college in like 2015 to 2020, and no one really got it, because it was one of those, as soon as you brought it up, someone's like, I got a Jewish friend, I'm not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I had Palestinian friends, and they were teaching me about Irish history, and that's where I was like, I legitimately need to be around you to understand my own path. And then when they're talking about erasure, it's like, erasure leads to ignorant relatives and people in your community. Yeah. Because that's one of the things that heartbroke me. It's like, why does this Irish Renaissance have to come on the heels of a genocide? Like, but and because we wouldn't be having this renaissance in culture, music, and language for Irish people if we weren't standing arm in arm with the Palestinians, because every time we got questioned on our support, we had to dig out the history books and be like, this famine, the other famine, this attack on our culture, this attempt at colonization. And and as people were pulling up the receipts, it's just like, holy crap, this is 800 years of
the same shit
and the whole like, we're not gonna have the signs in your language, we're not gonna teach your history,
change the name of the towns, change the name of the streets, change the name of the mountain,
change the name of the region,
the river, all of it. And
getting back to what you're saying about your disillusionment with the Democrats, like for me that really, like, two parts was them not backing Al Gore when that coup happened, and then also when Obama gassed the natives in November, and that he didn't stand in that all those cops were not immediately put on trial of, you're using grenades on tents and water cannons in November in Northern America. And that everyone, like, how much slide Obama got for that, where it's like, no, this was, you were like, and that was kind of the joke amongst like artists and academics, and it was really hammered away in the Boondocks of like, Obama didn't solve racism, he actually like made addressing it harder.
Well, and I think that's a one of the things that comes up with that is having access to the internet and having access to all of this information and having access to people who are thinking about it and talking about it and presenting information. It's easier to find the receipts on shit Obama did. right? Like you're not just living with some some sort of like hazy, it was just so good, the good old days, whatever, right? You can actually go, wait a sec, like right now, there's there's this whole narrative of the guy who's taking over Syria, Al Sharia. I'm gonna get his name wrong, and everybody's like, oh well, Trump is backing him, and he's got to be such an asshole if Trump's backing him or whatever. It's like, look at we can look at like who's been in on this for years, for generations. Like this goes back, like we have the receipts. It's not just, oh, since Trump's a bad guy and he's supporting him. It's like the Obama administration guys, they support him too. Like, it's all there to be seen. They just want to overwhelm us with so much information that we can't connect those dots. But those dots are all out there to be connected. It's all available, but they want to bury us in so much other information that it's like, we're too busy complaining about the Gulf of America, that it's not called the Gulf of Mexico anymore, to actually look up like, oh yeah, the Obama administration bombed Yemenis, at a wedding with a drone strike. Like, no, be mad at because Trump did it. It's like, what? Obama did it fucking too.
I like that you brought up that part, because one of like my first like poems on Middle Eastern politics was about drone strikes in Yemen in high school in 2014, 2015.
Right.
And
I'll tell you, I didn't know. Like I'm here to say to you, you had this understanding, and I did not have that understanding. Like I was drinking the Kool-Aid. Like yeah. I drank the Kool-Aid at that point.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people did, because it's like you wanted to think after all this time where it's like we wouldn't be there for bad reasons still, and
right.
And I'm
sure they're really bad people.
When they had Clinton, Biden, and Obama at that Democratic fundraiser, standing arm in arm, I made a meme, and it was just like crimes,
criminals,
all committed, and the one thing is like they all bombed Yemen. And as one comedian friend of mine put it, he's like, "Can you even call yourself a president until you've bombed Yemen?"
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, it's one of those like...
It's one of those things you got to do.
Yeah, it's just like on the checklist.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Don't tell them about the aliens.
totally.
Bomb
Yemen. Okay, we got all that covered.
Yeah. And just that it's like... And then actually, Yemenis history is fascinating. It's their civilization... It makes ours look like a toddler.
I know, and that's part of it too. Is like there's this narrative. I don't remember how many years ago this was, but this was I was already aware of the Israeli-Palestinian situation at a younger age, and I remember there was a guy I was working with who was Jewish and not like necessarily like forward about it, but he was still pro-Israel, but not like super pro-Israel. He was just just kind of normal run-of-the-mill pro-Israel. And something happened, and I was like, but wait a sec, no, this is really about, I was kind of laying the whole thing out. And we were at work, and it turned into this, like, yelling match. And, like, they were like, what are you two yelling about? Like, we were on set, and we're just like, and I was like, oh, and, like, that's a touchstone I have of, like, I don't really remember where my politics were on a lot of stuff. I have to, like, think back to, like, specific moments and be like, oh, I can point to my politics on that were in this spot at that time, because I wasn't like going around talking to people about it, but it was in there, and when confronted with it, I knew where the chips fell on that, because it wasn't like it wasn't like now where it's like it's in my artwork where I do artwork about Palestine and things like that. It was just like in the back of my head I was like, no, the whole Palestine thing, it's fucked up. The Israeli things, it's fucked up. Like I knew it, so it wasn't until you were confronted with somebody saying, "Oh yeah, well there was just dirt there, and Israel made it green," and it's like the same thing with Yemen, right? There's this whole narrative like, "Oh yeah, they were just they're just savages or something, and you're like, you have no fucking idea what's going on in Yemen.
Yeah.
Like, they are not savages. Like, they have a fucking culture and a civilization, and it's actually pretty fucking amazing.
Yeah, and I like that point you bring up of them, of people saying, like, oh, there was nothing there, and then having to contest that, because that is one of the fun things about, like, I keep at least the bigger sources, so if someone wants to, like, call me, it's like, no, this book, this professor.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Because that's, when you're defending human rights, you have to have all your sources cited, and when you're attacking them, it's
you just make random bullshit up.
Yeah, because that was the thing is, I went to a high school that had a huge Jewish population,
Mm-hmm.
and I learned after October 7th how many kids I went with that supported genocide, and I was like, your grades were so much better than mine. Why did you drop the ball morally like this?
Yeah.
Because I said to my mom, like, hey, Mom, I know I didn't get into UCLA, but I'm not actively condoning genocide on Facebook. I thought the two would be, like, mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
And I'd, like...
Who knew?
I'd unfriend a lot of people I went to high school with, just like, I'm not even going to argue. Like, I can't, I don't want to, and then also, like...
Just block.
Yeah,
just bye. Yeah.
And, like... And I had people, when I started showing support for Palestine, I didn't do that till after I got laid off over a Palestine post. I was working for kids at a company, but I was working for someplace, and I waited 2 weeks before I shared anything about Palestine. I was just like, let me simmer this out. And it was Irish politician Richard Boyd talking about how he lived through the first Intifada, which I'm like, this is a pretty solid source. Politician who was there. Let me just share 60 seconds of it.
Yeah.
Because it was a little post, because I wanted to, like, let my Palestinian friends know, like, hey,
I see you.
I see you.
Yeah.
I acknowledge this solidarity we share.
Yeah.
And then I had people going, oh, you're all of a sudden you all of a sudden care about Palestine now? And then I was sharing them sets I did from years back of, here's me doing this joke in 2023.
Yeah.
Here's me doing this joke about Israel in 2022.
Yeah.
And I saw a lot of this, like, gatekeeping from Conan Nolan on NBC. He absolutely hates anyone who supports Palestine.
Right.
And he was saying, well, why weren't they there for this random... It's like, all the people protesting there are currently college kids who were in high school, and it took...
Yeah.
And
it took a minute.
Yeah, and then also... But then I was saying to some people, like, do you want me to share the links to my high school poetry about Middle Eastern geopolitics?
Yeah.
And then they usually... went silent after that.
Yeah.
When I was like, it was going to take me some digging to do, but just...
I'll find it if it's really going to help.
But the fact that it's like, I had to go that far back just to prove a point of, like, I've always been concerned about this.
Yeah.
But also part of it is, like, you gotta... I empathize with other friends who are exploring the heritage of, like, the resources aren't there to learn about your ancestry. You have to dig, and you're going to go down some... rabbit holes, some good, many bad, to understand the truth about your heritage, because every culture, I realize, is subject to its own, like, to its own stereotyping.
And erasures. And,
and that there are people who are, like, picking up on one historical misconception. And I see it with, like, Middle Eastern people trying not to get their stuff all boiled down into the same, like... groups, or it's like, oh, it's not all just Aladdin, or and understanding that, because, like, that's also, like, when I'm describing Irish culture, I'll use 3 different words, because it's like, here's the actual word, here's the word we think it is, here's the blanket term. Right. And
it can be complex.
And that's one thing that I see, like, my duty, especially as, like, a verbal artist, of, like, how do I make this boring stuff that I'm super into digestible in poetry, in jokes, in a story I tell on a show, because I feel like, and that's also where I get mad at, like, filmmakers who aren't being totally historically accurate, of, like, we're good at this art form, we should be able to tell an accurate narrative without misleading people.
Right.
Because it's, and I feel like it's very important to, like, especially now, like, doing your research, because, like, Hamilton was based on one of the worst cited Hamilton sources, and they kind of left out the fact that he was mentioned in a report on what inspired Hitler.
Right. Just saying.
Yeah, and just, that's one of the bigger examples of research and understanding, because Aaron Burr was actually the protagonist who was for women's rights and cleaning up, my point I was making is I feel like as artists it's a lot of like compromise of what are you like, is this piece for me or is it trying to get seen? And I was saying specifically, like getting back to the film industry, like I've met a lot of Middle Eastern, specifically like Palestinian actors and actresses who have this incredible like separation of they may have to play this stereotyped version of their culture, but they're grateful for the opportunity. Even though what they're doing is kind of degrading their culture, but it's a paycheck, it's them getting seen, and they know it's just part of the job. And I, like, as a writer, like, and performer, like, the equivalent I get to that of is especially, like, cutting back historical facts so I can make a joke about a specific angle. As a poet, it's maybe making something a little more rhymey, especially when I'm doing stuff in writing in Irish and know they're not going to understand it. So I'm trying to like play off of the flow of the words. Or I'm trying to use the rhyme scheme to slide off these jagged topics I'm discussing. And I feel like it's something people don't always realize, like, oh no, you're seeing these shallow surface level performances because that's who has the money, is the person who's willing to pay for that. And you're constantly
balancing all of that. Well, and so you're taking certain forms of artistic license to try and create something that's palatable and digestible and accessible and can be put out into the world. I mean, that's so much of it, and especially when you're working with ideas that are not necessarily profitable. And I mean, I think that's across the board with just anything that's like decolonial or anti-capitalist or any of that stuff. How do you engage with these ideas in systems that are driven by these things you're criticizing? It's a complex. And a little off topic, but it'll spin into what like music have you been listening to help you cope with these times? Because especially when I'm doing like visual art, there's always a song or an album on in the background. I have specific albums that I save to listen to beginning to end for longer projects. So musically, I'd say, I when I'm working on longer projects, I actually don't listen to music as much. I listen more to, there's like a very specific podcast that I listen to that's about world revolutions.
Oh, which?
It's called the Revolutions Podcast.
Oh, I listen to that to fall asleep. I love it because, and this is where I say when I tell people, like, the best documentaries, the guys have no riz.
Like, totally. It's just...
But I like that he's going methodically and he's going piece by piece. Because having like done community organizing, people see the headline, the stuff that's in, but then it's like that's 5% of it. The other 3 months before that were long meetings and late nights,
preparation and everything.
And I feel like he does a good job of explaining. No, it's guillotine, monotony, debate. Then are we going to guillotine? More debates.
Monotony. Some gunfire over there. Uh-oh, now there's a war.
And for those of you who don't know, it's the podcast is just called Revolutions, and I like with a name as edgy as that, you're expecting it to be like punk rock, and
totally.
It's just this mild-mannered father. Sorry, I was feeling under the weather last week.
So we're going to skip next week because I'm going to be in Cleveland. It's like...
and it's just like, you tell he's doing it in his home office with a sign, do not disturb sign that some toddlers are staring at with intrigue. No, I love that. And that's one also that, like, because I can kind of zone in and zone out of it sometimes. Like you said, you can fall asleep to it. Like, but I still retain
a lot of it, so I love that. So I can remember like specific parts and specific revolutions, like what I was doing. Like I remember in the Russian Revolution, like I remember specific moments during that revolution where I was working on a specific project. So I have like touchstones from that. But musically, it's funny because like a lot of it ends up being, like Chumbawamba. Their whole bit.
No.
So Chumbawamba is the only song they have that's famous is, I get knocked down, I get back up again, right?
Yeah.
That's their famous song, but they're an anarchist collective, and they're just very anti-fascist, and they've got but they're really into this notion of accessibility, and so they're not out there trying to be sort of academic about this. So like they've got these songs they're like folk songs about killing Nazis. They're like the most punk rock band of all time, and they're some of it's easy to listen to, some of it's not easy to listen to, but it's just it's good fun music. Like but they were also like really into soccer, football. So they were really into this concept of, hey, we're into, like the whole football kind of thing and that's where our people are. That's where the working class is. They're into that. So we're going to make songs that are like about that. And so that song, I get knocked down, I get up again, and it's about drinking. It's a drinking song. It's a kind of a party song. It's about them like going to the working class and saying, we're working class, you're working class, we're in this together. And it's hilarious, but they're amazing. They're just that's been something that's kind of pulled me through, is how do you navigate the record industry as an anti-fascist? How do you do that? And they fucking did it. And they even had a hit. And they made a lot of money.
That would be a title for a great series or something how to survive the entertainment industry as an anti-fascist.
Totally.
And especially when it's just they're every.
Yeah.
It's more dangerous to have a Palestine sticker on your car than a Blue Lives Matter sticker.
Oh yeah.
Even though it's only one of these groups killed George Floyd.
Yeah, exactly. And kills people every day.
Yeah, that's one thing I always liked about punk rock, is that as heavy it is, there's silly within.
Yeah. Well, there has to be.
Yeah.
They can't take themselves too seriously.
And I feel like now it would probably be, because of the internet, it's like you could blow up online but have no commercial success because rich dudes don't want to give money to people advocating for their deaths.
Exactly.
Which is why Rage Against the Machine and Rise Against shocked me. Their commercial would be like, if any of their songs come true, you guys die, right?
Yeah. It's that I remember it was like this little black kid in a suit with a microphone, and he was walking up to guys on Wall Street.
Oh, the little black girl, yeah.
The little black, yeah. And she's like, where will you hide when the revolution comes? She's asking all these questions to these Wall Street guys.
It'd be fun to do now, but dressed as Luigi.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah.
The Super Mario character.
The Super Mario character, because we don't condone any sort of violence.
Yeah, and then you have the lead singer of the Circle Jerks at Coachella going, "We need an army of Luigi."
The army of Luigis.
And that's where I was like, I'm glad to see punk still got it, because...
Yeah.
Well, speaking of punk rock, I was listening to the audiobook for the lead singer of Bad Religion, Greg Geffen. His autobiography is called The Punk Paradox.
Okay.
And he was talking about how he formed Bad Religion just as the standardized street signs came out.
Oh.
And they were looking for a name, and he thought, let's put a cross behind it. Because that no parking sign was now, and that it had just been mandated nationally. So it was already visual, and how he combined those two symbols. And he was saying it lets you know where we're at. It invites questions. We chose the biggest religion, right. So we're not singling out other persecuted groups.
Right.
And that Crossbuster logo is one of the most iconic images in punk rock and counterculture.
Yeah.
And it was interesting hearing him how they were juggling like being a commercial act while all of their songs are critiques. But I also think of like the system, and he was coming at this from like an academic background, because Bad Religion's the reason many punks had the vocabularies they do.
Yeah.
But I think the record labels were just kind of going, no one's going to look up what all of these words mean, right?
Exactly. Well, there was a story somewhere about how like Marx's Capital got into Russia, and it got past like censors and stuff, because people were looking at it, they're like, nobody's gonna fucking figure out what this means. And so they let it in. It got past the censorship because they were like, no, nobody can understand any of this stuff anyway.
Yeah, and that's where you're gonna be like, yeah, we totally don't understand
any of it.
Well, that was the thing I learned is when Trump came in office, Free Palestine got taken down from TikTok.
Oh, okay.
Like videos like that just wouldn't get attention.
Yeah.
They wouldn't circulate. But I could say Shir Saddam Palestine, and
nobody. Yeah.
And
that was fine.
Well, it's also because they haven't trained the like.
Algorithm.
There's a few different languages. Like if you go translate on your phone, because my friend passed me his phone, work friend passed me his phone, and I messaged his girlfriend in Irish, and she's like, I can't. Google won't translate this for me.
Oh, wow. Right.
And it's because they didn't train these AI models on Irish, but they trained them on Spanish and other languages.
Totally.
So, and I was realizing, and that was where the like anarchist in me, where I'm like, oh,
this is how we'll communicate.
My people and I have a language that none of you can comprehend, and only we're motivated enough to learn.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Perfect.
Yeah, like
Well, it was like the code talkers in World War II. They were indigenous, and so they spoke a language that no one outside of them understood.
Well, that was the funny thing, is that had Americans been more competent at genocide, we would have lost to the Nazis, who were also committing a genocide.
Exactly.
So it was our dropping the ball when we had biological warfare on our side.
Exactly.
And that was another thing that, like, going back to like linguistics, that I was fascinating to learn, is that in the Americas, there's the greatest language diversity as far as like completely different structure, how tone and hand gestures in some languages can play a huge role.
Yeah.
And I was looking, and I saw like a language diversity map, and it was unbelievable, where you're like, all these groups are speaking radically different dialects with different rules. And then you look at Europe, where it's just like blob, 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 that one dot of the Basque.
Yeah.
And then,
but it's all basically the same kind of with variations.
Well, it's because they were all had a more tracing the ancestry was a lot easier.
Yeah.
Whereas with indigenous languages, it's just like, if you went 4 miles in either direction of some parts, it's just like your same language but different dialect.
Yeah.
And I was trying to get a better grasp on that, and then I was looking at like the Celtic languages, where it's like, oh, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, and Manx cannot have a conversation, but they will understand select words between the two. They might understand like connective, like structural things, but they're not going to be able to have
a detailed.
Yeah, and for me, like going the evolutionary route, I'm like, that's survival. That's their. Why else, unless you're you only get that diversity when you need to make sure messages aren't shared.
Right, yeah.
But it was fascinating to learn about that, of like, oh, that's why having these other languages is important. It would sort of be like if Japan did their codes in, like, indigenous Japanese.
Right.
Because that was another thing I was, like, interested to learn about, is Japan's issues with their indigenous people.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the names, but the indigenous groups in northern Japan that had their own, like, it looks radically different than what we associate with, like, Edo-Japanese culture.
Right.
And it, in a weird way, I'm like, that's what irks the history nerd in me, where I'm like, we don't know more about what they did or they thought because...
Yeah, they got squashed. Yeah.
So we talked about music. What shows have you been watching to pass the time, distract yourself, or maybe confront these things?
Oh, I don't know. It's interesting because I think I watch a lot of documentary. I work on documentary. I do a lot of work on documentaries, and I watch a lot of documentaries.
What are some documentaries you've been watching?
Well, this guy named Adam Curtis, and he's a BBC documentary guy, and he does some fantastic films on that are all it's all BBC, so it's all on YouTube. But he has a fantastic documentary called Hypernormalization, and hypernormalization is this concept that was coined by a Russian propagandist that you deploy out so much information that people can't process it, and one of the techniques to do it is you support both sides of a situation. So the concept would be that while the Black Lives Matter protests were going on, that they would potentially be funded on both sides by the government just to give both of them legitimacy and to create doubt in people as to which one's legitimate. So these are techniques that were kind of explored in America during abortion, right? You've got pro-abortion and anti-abortion, mm-hmm. and one would think that there would be groups that would want to be on one side or the other, but in this concept of hypernormalization, the money would go to both groups to fracture thought and then subfracture again on something else, like Israel-Palestine, like Black Lives Matter, and keep fracturing so that whereas we might have had comrades who were Jewish, you might be losing some of those Jewish comrades because of this fracturing, and by playing out all of these fault lines, that it ends up kind of making people not know what's even real anymore. What mm-hmm. can they have faith in? And so this concept of hypernormalization is increasing the pace of information, and lies as much as truth. Like, you just bury the truth in just constant information, and then people are like, well, but that's fake news. Oh, but I don't know what fake news is anymore. Like, maybe that's fake news. And then you just can't even tell, and it's then this notion of getting people to just give up. And this is something that happened in Russia. They just pounded people with their reality collapsed, and everybody knew it collapsed, but they had to just kind of keep on going, thinking that their reality was still working. So that's what the documentary's about. It's really his editing process is great. It's really fun. But so Adam Curtis in general, and Hypernormalization specifically, just great freaking movie. I don't know. I anytime that I think that I would get sucked into watching TV, I try and just sit and write. Yeah. It's like, I think I'd be just better served, writing than,
Yeah.
Oh.
I respect that, because whenever I'm watching stuff, as you can see in my open journal where I'm like, I should be writing. And but also I am very much someone who will frequently works themselves near to death, exhaustion.
Yeah.
And I'm very picky about what I watch. Yeah. If I'm watching something, it's because I want to see how they're breaking down this complex historical thing.
Yeah.
I have favorite professors like Roy Casagrande.
Mm.
He's a professor, but if he had his life been a little more bumpy, I can totally see him as a comedian, because I see where he's poking jokes, or he's laughing in a Kurt Vonnegut-esque way of humans are just so ourselves and we can't get out of our own way.
Right.
And but with everything happening in the world, sometimes my anxiety gets overwhelmed, and like a few weeks ago, I was like, I can't do the bad news if I watch another permafrost documentary.
Totally.
I'm gonna smoke all my weed, and so like, and that's one of the things I like about anime is it's a great checkout for me, and sometimes I'll find a new one and I'll fall in love with it, but like I'm rewatching this Gundam from 1995.
Awesome.
And just something about the animation, some sci-fi, politics, vague liberation stuff.
Yeah.
And it's thinky enough where it's like, okay, I see the like vague comparisons, but it's not so on the nose because there are plenty of animes that cover genocides, and I'm just like, this is just, hey, 5 giant robots just slugging these weaker automated robots to pieces, and they're all very colorful, and then you throw in like
the sound effects,
the 90s music, and it's a bit of like nostalgia for me, but also like just enough to take my mind off of stuff that I can unwind, and that's what I'm usually watching before Revolutions. It's like, let me see these giant mechas beams spear each other to pieces, and then I'm going to hear about this, about France realizing that maybe killing the king and queen wasn't a great idea.
It's all going to hell.
Yeah, and that's where I very much love animation. And why I still try to like stay up to date on what animes are popular, because I realize like that's how I can connect with people, because they may not want to talk about about all the self-improvement they did, but when they say like, man, I really empathize with solo leveling, I'm trying to level up too. It's like, or like one of my favorite examples is when people talk about what Naruto characters they resonate with, because it's like, oh, you won't tell me you cried alone, but you'll say you understood what Gaara went through.
Right.
You don't want to talk about how disadvantaged you were, but you'll say Rock Lee inspired you.
Right.
And being able to keep that discussion, because like I hosted a poetry workshop and I asked people what their favorite superheroes were, because it's like, no, this is how we see ourselves. We don't have religious texts and the Odyssey that we're seeing ourselves through these narratives. It's now the Batmans and the Spider-Mans and these cartoon characters that we're personifying our struggles through. Right.
That are cultural touchstones.
And
archetypes.
And that's like, I'm not always a fan of the newer shows that come out, but I like to just stay up to date on like...
knowing what's out there.
And that's also why I'm intrigued, because some people like watch stuff to take their mind off of it, others to validate, because there are like animes that have where it's like, all right, if I really don't want to think about anything, I'm gonna go space dandy, because it's just visual existentialism. Because I'm very conscious, like, because even going back to like the music thing, like music a lot of time lyrically it's an outlet for me, especially when I'm not having heavy discussions. That's when like I need to listen to really lyrically heavy hip-hop or punk, because it's like I enjoy the art of words and saying as much as you can with as little, and hearing other people do it where it's like, oh no, that was, I like what they did there with that beat, and and that's what I'm also like interested of, like artists and the other art they're into.
Right.
This is one thing I wanted to ask you earlier, like what visual artists would you recommend other people check out? If say like, because most people in my generation's like, all right, Shepard Fairey, graffiti artists, maybe they understand Basquiat, but what are like some visual artists you would recommend people check out?
That's interesting. Well, I'm interested in being surprised, and I think that there's a lot of I think like we're talking about with music, like with anything, right? These things are dominated by what's saleable and what's marketable, so stuff like Jeff Koons and stuff like that, that's like, it's really about, the stuff that sells tickets to people going into places and things like that. Things that I think are, just more like emotional and more like, grounded. Like, I'm a big fan of, Laurie Anderson.
No.
she's a musician, but she's an artist. She was Lou Reed's wife.
Oh wow.
And I've just gone to see her speak, and she's just really talented. It's a filmmaker who I think is there's like Jodorowsky. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
So Jodorowsky's I think he's Argentinian, and did a lot of what I think you could consider to be sci-fi, but he had a rendition of Dune that never got made, but he's an amazing visual artist, and he's got a movie called Holy Mountain that's just visually staggering, but also like the messaging is incredible. So yeah, I think Jodorowsky's probably, like a visual artist who I would definitely recommend. And then there's one more who I'm a big fan of, and he kind of rides the line between he's really an amazing artist but also kind of saleable, and he's this guy named Matthew Barney, and he's an American filmmaker. So yeah, it's funny that like when I think of like the visual artists that I'm into, that they're filmmakers, as opposed to like museums or
I appreciate that, and it's like when I've interviewed a lot of poets, their favorite poetic inspiration are singers and rappers.
Songs, yeah.
And it's only like a select group of like people I knew who actually competed in slams where it's just like, oh my goodness, Sierra DeMolder, Neil Hilborn, or
right.
Or like for me, like the two poets that if I have to like recommend, it's like Saul Williams.
I was just gonna say Saul Williams is like a if I'm gonna think of a poet,
he's a guru in human form.
Yeah.
And like I read his book, The Dead MC Scrolls, was like one of the most life-changing books where I was like, I can still quote that book from memory, and I've given it away to friends. Right, yeah. Just like, get this back to me whenever you need to read this.
I'll have to check that out. I don't know that book. That's awesome. It's
some of the like songs off of his albums, the like poems that they originally were.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he is one of those Renaissance artists where it's like he's just every art form he's gonna dabble his fingers in, and he's gonna do it in his own exquisite way. Like what was it called? Neptune Frost. Yeah. That like Afrofuturism.
Oh, well, the one I think of Shaklack Clack. Like that's because it's also it's like spoken word that then becomes really rhythmical, and like
he has a line in one of his songs, I am not the son of Shaklack Clack.
Yeah.
I am before that.
I am before.
Yeah, and then that like how he like that's such a like slam poet.
Oh, it is.
Roll of words and But I feel you on like even though like I do a lot of like symbolism and iconography, it's like a lot of my inspiration is just like ancient symbols I'm coming across and how like not to appropriate them and do them justice. And I like, but also like appreciating the patterns, because a lot of times when I'm handling clothes, people don't know the patterns they're looking at. It's like, no, that's an Orthodox cross.
Right.
That's
Gnostic or whatever.
Yeah, or that's a Greco-Roman pattern versus a Celtic pattern. And seeing how like symbols and stuff like that, because I view even like my clothing choice a bit as visual art, because I'll wear a keffiyeh with a kilt and then leave people to figure that out. Or like one time I showed up in a kameez, just super casually, didn't even draw attention to it, but it's just like, no, it's and for me, like that's the difference between like it being a costume and it being an article of clothing is, can you be upset about your normal day-to-day stuff while still be wearing it and just throw it on? And using like clothes as like, oh, I'm not just wearing this, I'm wearing it because after I've studied this culture, because I have a hoppy coat that I'll wear out and about, like a short kimono, and I went to my friends in the AAPI community like, is it cool? And they're like, yeah, what are you we don't like, and especially knowing that it's like coming from me, they're like, no, we're like that you're getting down with the garb and the food. If you carry a samurai sword, then
that's kind of weird.
Yes.
That's kind of going weird.
And versus like, I love seeing people in kilts. I hate St. Patrick's Day and everyone who wears in green.
Right.
And that could...
Yeah. Like I've always been, since I was a kid, I was really interested in Haitian voodoo. And there's a lot of symbols that come out of that. And that's something that I was super into for a big chunk of my life. And then, you know, after hearing the Revolutions podcast on Haiti, like, just freaking supercharge that. But then, you know, appropriation, right? Like, there's this, you know, I'm fascinated by it, but I remember as I was kind of, you know, sinking down into it and coming to terms with, oh, wow, the way that these representations get played out is that they're about, you know, in some ways they're about like lifting up, but a lot of it's about like suffering and trauma. And like that suffering and trauma, you know, of slavery.
Yeah.
Like, I am super into these symbols. I'm super into like the process of making them. I've explored that process of making them. I love that. I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. Like, I can still love it, and I can say that I think it's amazing, and I think that the whole religion is amazing, and it's a very rich and deep tapestry, and it is not mine to fuck with.
Yeah.
Like, I can't, you know, that to me is when I think of...
I respect that, because, like, I see it, like, with the white dudes getting the kanji and stuff tattoos, when it's like, hey, the Irish had their own ancient line script called Ogham, but no one digs into their own history, so they're appropriating the few cultures they were taught about.
Yeah.
And
that they think are far out.
Yeah.
You know, that they think are, you know, it's like, oh, this is so different. You know, it's like, yeah, you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's not yours.
Translating stuff with the same letters in a different language is hard enough.
Yeah.
That someone's like going, I totally understand kanji.
Yeah.
And I'm also intrigued by voodoo, and I'm just a theology geek.
Yeah, totally.
Because
100%.
I connect it to like mental health this was mental health treatment and government before we had any of it.
Yeah.
And like, I consider myself like pagan.
Sure.
I practice druidism in my own way, and that's the thing I love about druids is no one's trying to force you to do anything.
Right.
We all just do stuff a little differently, but we acknowledge similar heritage, a similar pantheon.
Yeah.
And I was like, some druids are putting it's just nature is at the heart.
Yeah.
Everything else in every direction, and there's a lot of notions and ideas from indigenous theology that I incorporate, but I don't incorporate the symbolism or the words, but like the ethos of like, oh, nature, that's a common theme.
Yeah.
And then you tie in the whole trauma part, because I know how like easy it is, like even studying like my own ancestors' religion, to get stuff mixed up. And then but that's just like, it's aside from like some British stuff, there wasn't like an American-sized interest in distorting our history.
Yes.
But when you throw in, it's like, oh, you had the French, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the Americans. You had all these groups who were trying to deny them their self-determination.
Actively. Yeah.
So, like, that I kind of view voodooism as where, like, paganism is now, is that you're never going to be able to distill it to what the individual tribes believed, because they were both oratory cultures.
Yeah.
But you can appreciate the surviving homunculus of these ideas.
Yes.
That were more or less trying to get at similar things that were related enough that they were able to survive with each other.
Yeah.
And it's a very, like, hard line to draw, and that's why, like, the Ogham alphabet that I use in my writing, the, like, specific parts that I'm invoking in my worship of nature, like, I understand how much those mean to me, and getting into those conversations as an outsider, it is, like...
Yeah.
But because that's where people are processing their traumas through, and that's why I think it's awesome for people to learn their ancestors' religions, because I view like a lot of stuff specifically on like Christianity, but monotheism as a whole, that there's a lot of room that pagan religions offer more as far as like mental health help, as far as explaining things like hormones, attraction,
anything.
Yeah, and just even learning like, oh, we say we are the result of like Greco-Roman thought, and Greco-Roman culture had all these aggressively masculine and feminine gods and goddesses, but then you look at the Celtic pantheon and it's a lot more nuanced, as in male gods have like traits that are invoked by gods who are women and vice versa, and there's a lot more overlap, and it's like, oh, maybe there's a lesson about appreciating the diverse parts of each other. And oh, why is our alphabet based on trees? Maybe we should be acknowledging nature. Oh, the Druids had specific rules for what trees you're allowed to cut and what ones you aren't. And one of my last papers I wrote in college was about how indigenous religions are the only religions where the more you practice them, the better the environments do. And I was going specifically like tribes throughout the North and South America where their entire religion and all of its teachings are actually ecological practices. And what other religion can you say where it's like, if you let the people in the specific area practice it,
things get better?
Yes, not just everything gets better.
Yeah, it get better.
But then you bring in any other religion and it's...
Well, specifically, I think it's great that you called out monotheism specifically, right? Because you look at the Abrahamic religions, and they're based on this notion of human supremacy, right? Yeah. That like humans are they're not part of nature. They are something separate and above nature, and that nature is there for the whim of humans, and that's like in Genesis, right? Like God is a male human, so he's the top of the food chain, and everything else is kind of like beneath that. And it's like and the animals are there for humans to use. That's why God put them there. It's like, no, we're all animals. We're all scurrying around on the planet together. This is all of our habitat. And, an indigenous mindset sees not only the animals as relatives, but the mountains as relatives. The river is your aunt. If the river's your aunt, you're going to make sure that the toxic stuff isn't going into your aunt.
Yeah, because then RFK might swim in it.
Oh, God. I try so hard to like not be super in tune with like the day to day, but like then some of that stuff just gets through, right? Like some of those memes just get through, and you're just like, God, RFK he's really out there. He's out there doing it.
He's like the anti-Kennedy.
He is. It's incredible. But I also think I think a lot about Celebrity Apprentice and like Gary Busey on Celebrity Apprentice, and this whole notion of like when you're running, like because it was like a competition, right, between two teams, and you had like the manager of each team, and the manager would have to pick who's going to be in like charge of this event for this week. And it's a really tricky thing that you want to pick somebody who is going to fuck up, who you can blame it on, right? Like that was like the whole thing. So like Gary Busey becomes like the perfect example of this, because he's a total fuck up. And you know that if you put him in charge of the project, he's going to fuck up. But also that means that Trump will fire Gary Busey because he fucked it up so bad. And you always want to deflect away from you not getting fired. And it's like, Trump hiring alcoholics and nut jobs and like putting them out there, pushing the agenda forward, but also like when the whole thing goes up in flames, he goes, well, look at this freaking idiot. And he'll blame, like to me, it's all Celebrity Apprentice. Like Trump has trained himself really well on how people relate to these concepts. He's a media animal. He lives and breathes it. And to me, RFK is Gary Busey on Celebrity Apprentice.
I love the Gary Busey comparison, because like one of the movies I watched most as good was the Rookie of the Year, when it's him.
Oh yeah.
The pitcher turned manager coaching the kid whose arm can throw the ball harder than anyone else.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, he's kind of eccentric, and then you throw in, and then you multiply that times a helmetless motorcycle accident.
Yeah.
And then just the thought of Gary Busey and Trump in the same room, and you're just like, which brain is worse?
Well, but see, Trump knows how to use Gary Busey. So that's the distinction, right? They're both like, off their rockers in different ways, but Trump's well trained in using Gary Busey as a tool to get people to watch his show. Like that's his whole point. That's the whole point of Celebrity Apprentice, right? Is to get people to tune in. So what's going to make people tune in? Weirdos and nut jobs. Kanye West, right? Like Kanye West is this same like media animal of like, what can I say? I'm out of the limelight for 30 seconds. What can I say to get myself back in the limelight? Okay, I can put on a swastika. Now you're talking about me, right? Like the most, I don't know if like you followed this at all. I know a little bit about Kanye. I executive produced one of his music videos back before he was a fucking freak show. But there's a song called Welcome to the Good Life that he did with T-Pain, and I produced that video. So like I got a little bit of a, I kind of keep tabs on him a little bit just because, for whatever reason. And his most recent thing, like he released that song talking about how he used to have sex with his male cousin. Right? Did you miss this one?
I didn't hear, like, it's, a few things surprise me these days, but it's like, I have my own, like, understanding of Kanye, because I, like, learned about him through the poetry scene, which was...
Okay.
So...
At a certain point, he was actually a poet. He was actually,
Well, if you watch his Def Jam performance, it's a cry for help.
Oh.
It's him saying, I see fame, I see attention, I see the money... It's bad for my mental health. It's turning me into someone I'm not. I don't like where this is, and
you're like, oh,
it's such a and it's in
so
the 90s.
Self-aware.
It's such a foreshadowing of it's like his conscience's last will and decree of like I'm
going down with the ship.
Like I'm buried after this performance. And I also like think of him as like the Sid Vicious of hip hop.
Sure.
Wearing the swastikas and stuff and like going, I'm being edgy, and then it's like, dude, you had the money and the attention, and that's where I'm like, I was also thinking about like how severe personality disorders in guys, some of them don't manifest till their mid to late 20s after they're unboxing their childhood trauma, because that's one thing I've seen a lot is like dudes don't really unpack their childhood till their late 20s when they're alone and go like, oh shit, I'm... And I feel like something had to do with that, and then drug abuse, but in a way it's like, no, Kanye and Trump are smart because they're making money talking. They're not waking up early or lifting heavy stuff. They learned how to talk well enough to get them attention and money, and that's where it's like, I don't want to call them stupid. They're actually brilliant.
Precisely. I mean, that's the tricky thing, right? Because you wanted to say something like, oh my God, they're so stupid, or they're so crazy, or things like that. And it's like, okay, in a certain sense, crazy, sure, but really they're going back to like an endorphin hit. It's like an addict.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, I get the endorphin hit from this thing, and I get the praise, and I get the ratings, and I get all this stuff from doing this thing. So it's not a shock that they keep hitting that same note over and over again and trying to amp it up, just like an addict, right? Like, oh, well, this hit of heroin isn't getting me quite high enough. I need to double it, and like, to me, that's where Kanye is at, is he's just freaking doubling his dose and just trying to get that same hit again.
Yeah, I also think of like, I struggled with addiction, and when I see like the fame and stuff and money, it's like they're just addicted to money, except money's the one thing you're allowed to have too much of, and no one says it's a problem. Because
it's all the other stuff around it. Having too much money isn't the problem. It's like all of the other narcissism or whatever.
Like, it's like you have enough. You have enough to get by. It's like your stash is full, and it's like no, I just need a little more.
I need more.
And seeing that also with attention, because I've run this like with doing social media stuff. The stuff that gets the most clicks are not the pieces that make me feel the most emotionally satisfied or in tune. Like, I was doing like PSAs and disinformation around the fires, and those were getting views, but it wasn't giving me the same feel of being on stage, of walking up, being in the middle, like, because I could always do another take, but when you're on stage, it's like there is no other take.
Yeah.
And that adrenaline rush, and then interacting with people afterward, because 3 conversations after a great performance hits you more than 56 likes in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And realizing, like, oh, so many other people are just, that's their dopamine, is those clicks, and that's why they're doing the dumber stuff, the dance videos. And then that's the fun thing of, like, having periodic ego death, is that sometimes, like, this means, the views mean nothing to me. What? Yeah. And it's almost like I feel bad for them, sort of, that they're addicted to looking like a dumbass on a historical level.
How deep? Yeah, how big a dumbass can I...
For generations, people are going to look back at you and be like, this maniac.
Epic.
Whereas, like, I've had a few times with art where it's like, if I just, with good community, I don't need to be heard or seen outside of it again.
Yeah.
And Kanye West is kind of like who Saul Williams wrote the back page of the Dead MC Scrolls for, because he saw when he wrote it in 2005, he's like, oh, I see that it's getting more and more shallow. Yeah. I see that the whole world is responding to every word these idiots say. Yeah. And a lot of people, like, I know a lot of, like, people in 20 to 25 that just be like, oh, Trump, Kanye, they're just joking around. They don't mean it. And even as the actual fascism is happening, it's just like, no, it's just a joke, where it's like, it's just a joke till it pops your bubble of privilege.
Yeah, it's just a joke to you because it's not attacking you. Yeah. And
that's also, I criticize Sex Pistols fans where it's like, no, I'm not going to write it off as, oh, the stuff. No, it...
Yeah. Well, that's a great one. I'm going to send you a great piece on Chumbawamba versus Sex Pistols. Like, it's fantastic because it's like, right, you can't defend the Sex Pistols. Like, once you actually dig into, like, who the Sex Pistols are, you just actually... They're a boy band that was invented by a clothing store owner, and he tried to make them as edgy as possible.
It's like if Hot Topic and the Proud Boys had to form an act.
Totally. That's the Sex Pistols, and it's like, yeah, but, but they were so edgy. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, and that's also a thing that punk, and I, like, that a bit of, like, punks can relate to, like, other scapegoated groups, is there's the intellectual side of punk, and there's everyone else who did dumb shit under the guise of punk rock that you have to deal with. Yeah. And I view that, like, when people are, like, trying to talk about, like, no, Islam's a peaceful religion. Like, yeah, totally. It's like
and there's a bunch of dumb people who like justify.
And actually, Islamic scholars are the only reason we're doing math and science right now.
Algebra.
Yeah, and
it's called algebra.
Well, that's like one of my favorite Kurt Vonnegut jokes. He's like, George Bush hates the Arabs because they invented algebra.
Yeah, exactly.
And that
they would kick it out of school now.
But you never hear that on NBC when they're talking about, hey, we're kind of bombing one of the crescents of modern thought.
Yeah, all like reality.
Because that's another thing I was thinking about with Palestine, where I'm like, archaeology, they're still digging around Europe and going, oh, we found another castle, fortress, library. Yeah. And I'm thinking of, like, layers. How earthquakes, like, there is so much ancient history and probably, like, missing pieces to ideas that as stuff's getting flattened and dug and
disappearing.
So, this is a fun question I ask, and also just with everything going on in the country. What would your last meal be?
Oh, wow. What would my last meal be? I've always been a fan of the Monte Cristo. You know what
Explain that for food idiots like myself.
Okay, so a Monte Cristo it's basically a ham and cheese sandwich with that you take the sandwich and you dip it in batter and then you deep fry the whole sandwich. So it ends up kind of, people who do it incorrectly kind of make French toast and do like French, basically a ham and cheese sandwich on French toast. And then you generally do it with like a raspberry preserve or something like that. But the correct way to do it is you take the whole sandwich and dunk it in like the French toast batter, and then deep fry the whole thing, so you get like a kind of a ham and cheese sandwich encased in batter. And that's always been kind of a favorite of mine. And then a few years ago, I got a deep fryer and like set it up in my kitchen. And the thing about a deep fryer is it takes like a bunch of oil, right? Like you get a bunch of oil, and when you're done using it, like you have to filter out all the junk and then store the oil and stuff like that. But if you just kind of like leave it built on your kitchen counter for a while, you kind of avoid all of that. So you kind of, the concept of the deep fryer for me is like doing a stretch where you deep fry a bunch of shit for a while, and then you clean it up and put it away and wait till you're prepared to like deal with that again in the future. So I had a stretch where I was eating a lot of Monte Cristos, and it's not like the healthiest life choice.
Good problem to have.
It was just not healthy. It was just like I gotta stop doing this. This is like I'm just So I don't know. I think that's if there's something that's kind of like gives me like a nostalgia and gives me like warm happy feelings. I think it's a Monte Cristo sandwich. So do you ever answer what you do? Because you've obviously thought about this because you've asked this question.
Yeah, it's like usually I just go whatever I'm feeling for.
Yeah.
Like because I have like my go-tos. If I'm like eating out and I'm choosing, it's like okay, it's either chorizo breakfast burrito or ramen. Those are just my go-tos.
Automatics.
But like other stuff of like kind of the Monte Cristo route of there's this pizza place called Danielle's. They make barbecue chicken calzones. And it's just, I love barbecue and pizza, and it's just a nice fattening mashup.
Yeah.
And, or like you were saying, the nostalgia thing, like French toast was my favorite as a kid. So all like the whole like making it, dipping, getting the batter just right. All those memories are just with like my parents, grandparents, me as a kid. Me being a picky eater, and they were excited because it was like the one thing I would
get
eat
into.
So, but like in this moment, French toast, since we're going the dipping route.
Yeah. It's funny because thinking about like the relationship to like my mom and like her cooking and her cooking process, she would always do French toast on an electric griddle that went out on the countertop. And I can remember when I bought myself an electric griddle so that I could do pancakes and like French toast and stuff on a big, because the electric surface you can maintain a much more consistent temperature. So when you're doing pancakes and French toast, you want to dial it into like the exact right temperature so you get consistency on all of them.
Oh yeah, my parents had a gas stove, so it all came out like looking like the topography of the moon, like some places are like what. And that's where it's like the key of like moving it around and usually the sides are or like whatever place is directly over the heat. Or if you're making more than one, it's gonna be a little uneven as far as
all over the place. But that's to me, when you talk about like the dipping and all that kind of stuff, it's the electric griddle is like, when I pull it out, like it just takes me straight to like making stuff with my mom, and like that's my nostalgia is all wrapped up in like that one piece of kitchen equipment.
Yeah, like I have an electric stove here, and I don't get those same like nostalgia things because it's like I'm not lighting it, I'm not worried about blowing the place.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a disconnect, and also because I can't cook things as like fast as I can on like an open flame.
High output.
Yeah. So this is another question that I've got some interesting answers to. If you had to flee the country, where would you go?
That's not even like a hypothetical, right? Like there's a point where
especially as like artists and free thinkers, it's just like they're going after what kind of artist today?
And just like how much stuff we posted on social media.
Like,
it's just and you know that like there's all of these AIs that are out there that are basically just building profiles on like who what layer of rounding up are you?
I know, and especially with like I've heard like how they're keeping tabs on community organizers. I know there's a file on me at least in 2 cities.
Yeah, exactly. And I used like I wrote for a Marxist newspaper in college. Like, so like I already knew it when I got out of college.
Because you're like, went to college.
Yeah, went to college _1 and then like wrote for a Marxist newspaper. But so but it's interesting because I don't have kids, so that's one of those things that like
it's a great choice.
Well, it's also like, the way that the world is turning out, like I can't imagine how much stress I would have in my life right now if I had to worry about like what was happening with a kid. Like
my friends with kids are so stressed out they're coming here to smoke weed with me.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that.
Like, I don't need that on my shoulders. But I am married, and so there's an interesting turn that happened. I try and share like I try and share very little of like my YouTube experiences with my wife, because I can be a little much. I mean, I'm sure you are familiar with the concept of being a little much, right? Like, so I don't like share a whole lot.
Well, yeah, and especially as like a Reddit user, where it's like that's a different side of me.
Yeah, exactly. We don't need all that. But there was one YouTuber, and he's called Not Just Bikes, and he's an urban planner from Canada, and he's all about cars have destroyed our civilization, right? That's his shtick. But he's an urban planner, so he talks about, and he goes to places and he's like, okay, here's a city that works well. Why does this city work well, right? And so that's his whole thing. And he's Canadian, and he does American cities and Canadian cities, but then he also goes to Europe, and he makes enough money on his YouTube channel to go to like Japan and talk about mass transit in Japan and cars in like Tokyo and stuff like that. But he's really big on the Netherlands, and in my mind, like, the Netherlands would be a possible place to bail to. And my wife got really into his YouTube thing, and she's like, I think we go to the Netherlands. So she's, after watching this thing about urban planning in the Netherlands, she's now started Duolingoing Dutch. So I think, it would be, and then we've got friends in Germany, so it's either Germany or the Netherlands, or probably, yeah. But like the problem is like there's no out.
Oh yeah.
There is no there.
Yeah,
it's all there.
Yeah, and like that was kind of the thing. I was like, as I was like looking into Ireland, it's like it's about the same housing crisis here, there, like and the like having another person who you're trying to keep safe is a different thing, because I was looking at a lot of after the fires, and then with Trump, I was looking at a lot of my single guy friends. It's like, hey, none of us have kids or a relationship. Statistically, we die protecting everyone else. Yeah. Are you prepared? And a bunch of my guy friends were like, yeah, why do you think I'm relaxing right now? Because when it hits the fin beyond repair, then we all have to get spears, and it's But that's been the mentality amongst a lot of the guys my age. It's just like, oh, we know fighting for resources is likely in our future, and short of kids and a wife, we got to be on the front lines, because
that's how it's working.
Well, that's how history goes. The young dudes of fighting age with nothing to tie them down. And I have plenty of friends with kids where it's just like, hey, I want you at home with the kiddos because I'm probably going to be a better first wave than a parent. Yeah.
No, going someplace else versus staying and fighting, right? Like that's the narrative. And it's like I think I'm too deeply entrenched here.
Well, that was the thing, is the fires sparked a new sense of community and stewardship for me. Yeah. Because I was like, screw America, I'm going to get out of here. And then when I saw the fires, and then I saw that people who didn't understand ecology were then dictating the legislation and the talking points, and I was just like, hey, I know I'm not a doctorate in this, but as someone who worships the smart people, you are not listening to them, and you really, really should.
Yeah.
And that was one thing where I was like, oh, I need to be an advocate on the ground and on the stage.
Yeah.
So when I hear performers make these dumb over assumptions of, no, California isn't a desert, it's actually a really delicate Mediterranean climate that can be very prosperous to life if maintained well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like for me, the jokingly, because is like Ireland, but I could also like totally see myself just kicking it in Japan. Like,
right. Yeah.
But
yeah.
I've had a few people who were so serious where they wouldn't give me an answer on air.
Oh.
Yeah, they're just like, no, I got a place. I'm not telling you, and then they point the camera, or you.
Okay.
But
yeah.
I was also like realizing that as like students were fleeing the country, where I'm just like, that's never.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was a joke the first time around, but now it's been a little more Gestapo-y secret police, and that's where I'm like, oh, this is.
Yeah, it's a real question. It's a real question.
Yeah, because I know some people were saying like Canada. It's like Canada might not let us.
Well, and it's funny, I mean, I don't know if you ever watched *Handmaid's Tale*, but like the TV show goes past. Like I read the book, and the TV show ends up going much longer than the book. And there's a certain point where people flee to Canada, and the Canadians get fed up and start kicking them out. And you're like, I think that's realistic. I don't think that that's unrealistic.
Well, also like. Are Americans going to Canada and behaving exactly like Americans? Because I have seen a bit of that of like, you're seeing it in like Southeast Asia with Israeli tourists who are just showing up.
Yeah.
And
a friend of mine from high school lives in Thailand.
Oh my God.
And so he saw a post I made something about Israel and something about that was going on with that. And he's like, oh dude, he's like, you wouldn't believe how this is going down in Thailand. Like they're going bonkers over it. Like, the Israelis are being such fucking assholes, and everybody knows, and now it's a known thing. Like, the Israelis are here, and they're awful. And after he said that, there was some stuff that happened in the news. I'm like, oh, wow. It's funny. I just got the information from a friend who lives there, and now it's bubbling up through the mainstream.
I want to be shocked, but I was watching this documentary on an earthquake that happened in Nepal. And it leveled numerous rural villages on the way to Everest. And there were these Israeli tourists, former IDF soldiers.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're going to go check for survivors and supplies. They did not come back with any food. They came back with a bag of cash from a safe they busted open and said, hey, we found someone's belongings out. And everyone knew that stuff was probably in a safe.
Yeah.
And then the villagers mauled them.
Yeah.
And it'd be like, hold up. And it was just like, and it was one of those like before, like,
yeah.
I was almost like, stupid idea. And then now I'm like, oh, this is a larger pattern of just not respecting any place you visit, including Palestine.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was shocking seeing like, where I'm like, and then the Israel, like, you'd think, you'd be like, hey, don't.
Yeah, they would say, like, don't do that shit.
Yeah, but how ingrained is it that's like everywhere you go?
Yeah.
And.
Yeah.
But. So, where can people find your art?
Oh, yeah. I'm obviously on, like, Instagram at @SFroschauer art. And I'm writing a lot on Substack now. So it can either be my name, or I'm going under this new moniker called, I'm really into mushrooms.
Oh, cool.
And I'm really into mycelium.
Yeah, I was noticing some of your mycelium art.
And so I, for a few years, I actually grew gourmet mushrooms for restaurants in LA and got really close to just the whole process of how mushrooms work and the philosophy of mushrooms. So I have on Substack, I kind of made a play on the word mycelium, and so my Substack is called My Silly So it's Mycelium Substack, And then I also have a zine called My Silly Zine. So there's ways to find me. If you're driving down Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood, I've got 2 big neon pieces in the middle of Santa Monica Boulevard near La Cienega. Big neon signs that the city bought for me a couple of years ago. So if you're in LA, you can see my work there. If you're in Glendale, almost every park in Glendale has one of my signs in it. They gave me a grant.
That's
so I put
awesome.
signs in all over Glendale. Yeah, it's all over the place, all over the country. But
awesome.
Yeah.
So that does it for us.
Awesome.
Today, you've been listening to SewBro. I'm Shane Kenny. Shane Kenny Comedy on all social media. Salon.